sometimes you go on a journey that you don't necessarily know that's the journey you're going to go on. But yeah, I went on this journey and I had some very good mentors along the way, and I think that's a really important thing about our work. And mentors aren't just, you know, Aboriginal people, they're also non-Aboriginal people, and so they've been really important people in my life and my professional development. Yeah, and what I've found is like just sort of getting coaxed a bit, I guess, or not even that, in those early days. Anne Stonehouse, who was a world-renowned early childhood expert, was the course coordinator, and one of the things that she did that really helped me was she pulled me aside outside of the bigger group of studying to talk to me about how I was going, and that really helped me to grow. And that's a really important thing, I think, that we need to do with children, that, you know, we do group kind of work with them and things, but sometimes we need to be looking and be observant about, sometimes we need to take a little bit of time to take children out on their own and try to find where they're going or what they're wanting to do. So that's been a really good lesson for me that I've used also with other people as well. I grew up in Darwin in a children's home, and I sort of went into the big world as a 15-year-old, and I didn't really know how to behave outside, and so I've had to learn that and to grow that. And that's one of the things that now, over my years, that I've worked with people, mostly with my own people, Aboriginal people, and Torres Strait Islander people, mostly Aboriginal people, but also with other people, that, you know, we just got to take it slow. We've got to think about things sometimes, you know, don't just jump in and assume things. Because I remember one day talking to the old lecturers, early day lecturers, Lynn Fasoli, about my family had bought me a, what do you call it, like a manicure and pedicure for my birthday or Mother's Day, and I went to go for this thing, and I was really embarrassed about walking in because I thought people are going to see me go in there and think, who does she think she is, you know? And Lynn said to me, VJ, they're probably not even thinking anything like that, no? You know, and I am constantly, not constantly, but you know, when I get to different places, I go back to those same words, what she said to me, and I have to think about that. Now, Veronica, is this just about what you're thinking, you know, or is that something? And a lot of the time it's just me, and I have to learn about, sometimes we have to step into things, you know, and do things. So it doesn't matter who we are, we have to do that. And that's the kind of thing that we've got to do with our children, is we've got to teach them, and not as in being the teacher at the front, but a lot of time it's alongside them, working with them. We've got to teach them about those processes.
When there's a discourse in pedagogy that says that children shouldn't be taught, then most teachers I know that rule, but they also have little rules for breaking that rule. So they will say, I don't teach the children how to do their paintings or drawings, but sometimes we do these little exercises where they have to cut and paste or colour, and they'll say that's for their fine motor skills development, or that's to help them later when they're writing. So we have little rules for breaking those rules, and so that can be very liberating for teachers if they can find another way of thinking through that. So and then the proof is in the pudding, when Linda Ashton actually talks about how she's an art teacher, and when her children were very young, they would come to her and say, can you please draw a horse for me? And she knew that the rule was you don't draw for children. You just leave them to figure it out for themselves. But at the same time, her arts training, she knew that it was wrong, but she secretly taught them anyway. And so she felt guilty, but she still taught them how to draw horses. And then when they got to be 11 or 12, people said, wow, your children are very talented. They must have inherited it from you. When in actual fact, what they inherited from her was she actually taught them how to do some of those things.
What's important here is that we say that children working together, just like adults working together, are more likely to create something interesting and rich and complicated than if any of us are on our own. So, socially constructed evolution of knowledge, if you like, is the thread that goes along with Malaguzzi's work. I think listening to children and hearing what they have to offer is absolutely key. So this has taken us away from a transmission view of teaching. We are not passing completely what's in our head into an empty head. We are co-negotiating, co-constructing together how that knowledge can evolve into something new. It's a third space, if that idea is of interest to you.
Scaffolding fits within a focus on social interactions and socio-cultural curriculum. So it comes from the ideas of Vygotsky, but scaffolding was actually developed by Jerome Bruner from his observations of parents, mostly mothers, interacting with their children, often around shared picture books. So he looked very closely at the ways that parents extended children's language, asked questions, made comments, encouraged children to join in the reading of the book, to talk about what was happening in the pictures, and those sorts of interactions require adults to be very tuned in, very sensitive to, very focused on children's intentions and children's language so that we can interpret that and not impose our own ideas on the child, but draw out from the child what it is that they're thinking. And sometimes we need to give them the language, the vocabulary, to help them put into words what it is that they're trying to say. So we can do that through scaffolding.
One of the ideas from Deleuze that I found really helpful is his emphasis on the power of desire. He talks about desire as not something that we're hanging out for, that we haven't got, but something that's a really productive and generative force, something that we can use to make things happen. And there are lots of things, I think, that we want to make happen in relation to curriculum, things that on the surface mightn't seem immediately possible. So his notion of desire really gives us hope, I think. He ties the idea of desire to forces that we can use, forces that we have power over, and he likens the idea of forces, for example, to the force that an ivy plant can have when it's climbing over, for example, a brick wall, or sometimes when it goes through a brick wall. If you think about desire as being like an ivy plant and the strength of ivy to get into places where it might be very unexpected, then I think that's really helpful. Not that I think Deleuze has a destructive take on things, but if you think of the power of ivy to actually go through a brick wall and outside out the other side, then that gives us hope that we can achieve all sorts of things as early childhood educators that again may not be immediately obvious.
I think it's very exciting that Australia has an early years learning framework. It's the first time that we've had an early years learning framework at a national level for early childhood, and I think there's lots of potential to use that framework in very creative and constructive ways as part of our curriculum decision making. It's one tool that we use to help us create curriculum. It's not the only thing that we use, so we use the early years learning framework alongside our understandings about our centre, our understandings of the children and the families and the communities that we're working with, our philosophy, our approaches to curriculum. All of those things come together in the daily decisions that we make about curriculum and the way that curriculum is enacted in practice. So the ELF, I hope, is something that's enabling for people, not something that people see as a constraint that's putting them in a box or telling them they have to do things a particular way, but actually opening up new possibilities for different ways of looking at curriculum, different ways of approaching curriculum within their setting.
You know, when I think of being there, that's that we talk about worldviews and Indigenous worldviews, that way of being in country, being with family. It's important to understand that there is that side, and it also then links in with different ways that we engage children and the opportunities and what we present.
Yeah, and just having that time for quiet reflection and observation rather than rushing off and writing everything down.
Because you can't.
No.
You can't. And sometimes I think, you know what, I'm just going to enjoy that.
That's the way we taught our children traditionally too, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Just having time to listen and watch and observe.
Yeah. And observe, that's it.
Yeah.
And not feeling that everyone has to come in and, this is the way we're doing it, but just giving children that space and that time. Because sometimes we're rushing.
Yeah.
Too many people rush.
Yeah.
And that's it, having time.
Yeah. And if you're rushing, you don't see as much around you as you might.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that thing of getting back to basics, isn't it? Slowing down.
Yeah.
I think someone interviewed us years ago and they were talking about how we grew up. I don't know who it was actually. And the person was saying that we had in common that with our parents we had quiet times just to go for walks and watch birds and watch butterflies and look at tracks on the ground and those sort of really quiet times.
Be able to climb trees and
make mud pies. That's what I'm glad about coming back over here, because everything's sand. Everywhere it's all sand. I was like, where's the mud? Where's the clay? There's no clay to actually make real mud cakes and real mud pies, and because I look at the beautiful photos that we've got of when the kids were little and they've got all these mud pies lined up. So the simple, that is so important for our kids to actually to go out, play with, to investigate country, be on country.
Yes.
Not just to be in environments that are just all plastic and metal and I always wonder, there are all these fortunate centres that have acres for their centre, to play spaces. But what about the people that are in urban areas, but being brave enough to take the children out and saying, okay, this is, I'm going to look at this centre and where can I take the children and what's the significance for the Indigenous people of that area.
Last year with Kiela in her kinder program, I did some voluntary work and so one of the things, I'd done some storytelling with the children and we were going to be doing felting on silk. And so Olga, her kinder teacher, had been talking with the children about patterns of the environment, and so it was a whole process over quite a few 2 terms, and then I took the children for a walk along the Moonee Ponds Creek, and some of the parents came as well, and so all the children had the opportunity to be learning about some of because I talked with them about some of the plants that we passed, and they had a big basket and they were collecting treasures off the ground as we went along, and I took them to Oka Mountain and we all we collected a little bit, and we had the children were in 3 groups and everyone got to grind up their ochre and then make paint, and then they did their handprints on calico, and then we went back to kinder and we had a fire in the digging patch, and the children roasted marshmallows. And I thought, what a beautiful experience for Kiela and all the children to, because they will remember when they eat marshmallows. They'll remember that time at kinder when they roasted marshmallows.
Yep.
And so, it was a really beautiful way to look at, the different patterns on a gum leaf and the bark on the tree, and then the children, they'd come up to me, later on in the term, and they'd sort of talk to me about, we took our nan down there for a walk, or, I've had parents coming and talking with me about, that was really lovely to actually realise about the Aboriginal people and that this is a significant area.
Yeah.
And this is the area that we live in. So they felt connected to that area as well.
Yeah.
is really beautiful.
Consciousness of and intentionality of consciousness does not end with rationality. Consciousness about the world, which implies consciousness about myself in the world, with it and with others, which also implies our ability to realise the world, to understand it, is not limited to a rationalistic experience. This consciousness is a totality: reason, feelings, emotions, desires. My body, conscious of the world and myself, seizes the world toward which it has an intention. My conscious body's constant exercise in releasing itself even to or from my consciousness, intending toward the world, brings or contains in itself a certain quality of life that, in the human existence, becomes more intense and richer. I'm referring to the need for relational experience on the level of existence and of interactions, the level of living. There is a fundamental element in interaction which takes on greater complexity in relationship. I am referring to curiosity, some sort of openness to comprehending what is in the orbit of the challenged being's sensibility. It is this human disposition to be surprised before people, what they do, say, seem like, before facts and phenomena, before beauty and ugliness. This unrefrainable need to understand in order to explain, to seek the reason for being of facts. It is this desire, always alive, of feeling, living, realising what lies in the realm of one's visions of depth. So we talk about relationships becoming, belonging in the early years learning framework, and I think if we sit with those notions and think about them deeply, there's a wealth of possibility inherent in there, and we do an injustice to children if we just treat such big concepts in superficial ways.
In one of our projects we were following early childhood educators in 6 different countries. We videotaped them for an entire day, and we asked them to talk to us about what they would see as the key characteristics of their professionalism in their day. And I remember well this one practitioner from a small town East German kindergarten who was very aware of this dilemma. She talked about all her actions being grounded in uncertainty, but at the same time depending on knowledge and experience. So she was very aware that on all her actions in the kindergarten and everything that she perceived as being her professional practice was grounded in uncertainty, and at the same time very much building on her professional knowledge, on her experience, and that it was a day-to-day juggle actually between the two for her to constantly reinvent her practice with the children and the families in her center. When we talked about the videotape, and we went through her day, she all of a sudden turned around and said, "Listen, Matthias, there is a fundamental problem here, because I know what I'm doing. I know that we're good at what we're doing with the children. We can see that we are building, working, and very stable and very reliable relationship with the children and the families. Even though I don't exactly know what's happening during the day. I'm walking into my setting every morning with some ideas, but I have no idea what it's going to be like at the end of the day. But the more I talk to local politicians, for instance, who asked me about the curriculum that we're implementing, and we're supposed to be implementing the mandatory state curriculum, the more I realize that I am perceived as being the expert for this practice, and the expert in a technical way, meaning that I'm in control, in total control of what happens in this classroom, and I'm not. And so I find myself constantly shifting between my two professional identities, the one that I'm living with children and families, and the one that I'm supposed to be presenting to the outside world.
And my way of addressing the field has been that I have used sociology, I have used anthropology, I have used philosophy and theories in different theories and critical theories in pedagogy. So this way of also thinking much broader than not into the way of thinking about development has been a really interesting and also a necessary force for me to go further and do my work as a preschool teacher and also as a preschool teacher educator. Addressing different issues connected to early childhood or preschool, the preschool field, I think that I resisted some sort of thinking about an essentialism, which was that children were perceived as going into this developmental thinking, that they were that a way of developmental develop was some sort of a stepping, was some ladder or a steps that built upon each other. And in many ways it didn't fit into what I saw and the way that I could also relate to my own background, and it didn't relate to the theories and the way that we were also educated in the early childhood education nearly 30 years ago. So also combining this with a lot of political issues, the way that I thought of minority, majority or minority perspectives, I had to search for other frameworks or other ways of thinking or doing the work I was doing in the early childhood field. And that was when I also was a director of a preschool in the 80s in Oslo, and I had the responsibility of also not educate but supervise and be in front of different theories that I also wanted to discuss with the staff in the institution. So in that way I started to go to the university once a week and started to study social pedagogical work, which for me was inscribed into a critical paradigm. We were taught to read Habermas, Adorno, all these Frankfurter School, which gave us as students new frameworks that we could also look into what we were doing in the preschool. So for me, searching for and then also wanted to have or to widen up the way that children were defined in a certain way of looking towards was a relief, and also gave me a totally different language that I could use to also ask new questions, to build up different ways of communicating with parents, with children, with the staff, and it widened in many ways my perspectives that I had before.